Well, again, welcome to our webinar. This is our fourth webinar of many. We'll be hosting these quite regularly, just as we see, take more observations and learn from the industry. Um, Ultimately, the goal is to just facilitate community and knowledge share amongst cannabis growers and move the industry forward as a whole. So let's get into it. So just kind of starting off, these are a couple of things I'm going to touch on. Obviously, give you a little bit more background on us, our company. Then I'm just going to get into some best practices on, trimming. At this point, the industry has been in effect in, depending on what market you're in, recreationally here in California for almost 3 years. Medical in many other states, recreational in Colorado for almost 7 years. So, I mean, there's data out there that we just want to make sure everybody's benefiting from to get the best out of their crops. Then we're going to talk about analyzing the effectiveness of your trim staff. Ultimately, a lot goes into producing these crops. So you want to have an effective way to, you want to get the most out of it at the end. And a big component of that is analyzing the effectiveness of your trimmers. The last thing I want to get into our platform, as one of the co-founders of GroLens, we kind of help facilitate that. So I'll kind of do a walkthrough of how we see that through our lens. So again, to promote knowledge sharing, community, and best practices amongst cannabis entrepreneurs. I myself, being one of the co-founders of GroLens, comes from a background in cultivation here in California under Prop 215 medical, and just kind of saw the industry evolve over time. So again, don't see too much knowledge sharing in community. Everybody's kind of all in their grows and their silos. So we definitely want to kind of bring some of that to the forefront. So just get into it. Again, these webinars are really quick. We understand you guys are busy, so it'll probably be 15 to 20 minutes just to kind of gauge the time. But yeah, best practices for trimmers. So from the observations we've taken, we've seen, growers obviously, in Northern California where you have your outdoor full term, you have your Central Coast where you have your more greenhouse oriented, light depth, and then in the southern side of things you'll see more indoor because it's more urban. In other states you'll see more indoor, like Oklahoma and indoor Montana, just because of the weather. But ultimately, no matter what type of grow you are, this is going to come up unless you're doing fresh frozen, which is a whole nother thing. But what we've seen is through our observations at all these type of grows is it starts with the trimmer and their station. So giving them the tools to be successful at their station specifically. So one of the first things, ultimately, a lot of bud is separated into trim and waste. Some people separate it further than that, but ultimately you have to mimic that at their trim station. So giving them a larger tray for your trim, a slightly smaller tray for A-grade buds, and some type of bag or standalone bag that you can discard waste in. The second thing we've seen is more than 2 to 3 shears at each station. So there's never a lag in quality when it comes to trimming. As you cut more buds and the terpenes are strong, it's sticky, it will dilute the sharpness of those trimmers. So by swapping those out, it'll help that you have better cuts and a better quality. And then the next thing kind of goes along with it is a way to clean those shears. It's something as simple as alcohol 90 proof right by their station and a paper towel to wipe them off. So ultimately, you just want to set your trimmers up for success off top by giving them a minimum of these 4 things at each station. The second thing that we've observed in trim rooms is a recorder station. So ultimately, there's typically only one recorder per 8 to 12 trimmers from our observations. The recorder's job is to make sure everybody gets their product weighed, which we'll kind of get in more into, make sure it's recorded properly. So ultimately at the recorder station, you want to have a certified scale, depending on your state's governing body. It could be CDFA in California or OMMA in Oklahoma or in Montana or Colorado. There's different governing bodies, but make sure you look at that governing bodies and see what scales are approved. One brand we recommend is the O House brand. It's been approved. And we also do offer an integration with that scale to digitally transmit data to it, which is the graphic you see. The next thing is just the old-fashioned notepad to take notes of anything that they might see. And then not necessarily a GroLens web app, but our customers have ours, but just a digital way to enter data. There's so much lag that time that is lost when data is transferred from a manual form to a digital form. We want to have a digital form at that station, and ideally, the scale will integrate with that digital form. So when we look at the process of trimming at a commercial scale, what we've noticed is a couple things. You're only trimming one batch or genetic at a time. Trimming more than one batch or genetic at a time can make things really tricky, really quick, and slow down your progress because you're trying to understand what genetic you're trimming. I know for some people who've been growing their genetics for years and years, they might know it down, they might not get mixed up, but for the sake of best practices, only work on one batch at a time, or one genetic at a time. And this is a lot easier. It kind of goes back to the way the dry room is organized. Ultimately, kind of have that line of communication between your trim managers and the people that are harvesting to better understand how they're hanging their plants on the lines, whether it be by batch or by genetic. So the takedown process can be easier. You can get those either straight in front of a trimmer or in a bin, and get that labeled to be processed and trimmed. The second is what you assign to your trimmer. So when you're assigning to a trimmer, you want to give them, assign them either by plant count or by bin. So if they're going to be trimming all day, and they can go through a good amount of plant matter in that day, you can assign them a bin that has 12 to 15 to 20 plants. But if they're just going to be, if you don't know if it's a part-time, you might want to assign by plants, give them 4 to 6 plants at a time, and watch them process. Again, those plants either being the same genetic and of the same batch. And the next thing is when to weigh out. So ultimately, tracking is super important, but you don't want to overdo it. So we've identified these 4 times to actually weigh when the trimmer would actually record the progress of that trimmer. Anything over this kind of starts to eat away at the efficiency of the operation. So the first is weighing rough weight before you give it to them. So say, for example, you're giving them a whole bin of 15 plants. Weigh that bin to see what they're starting off with as a starting point. If you're just giving them a couple plants and you really want to be granular, you can also weigh those plants, or you can have an idea of an average rough weight that you're giving them before it's processed into A, B, trim, or weigh. So just understanding that is important. It is going to be an extra, another weighing time, but trust me, at the end, you'll be able to have a lot more analytics, and it will kind of pay off. The next thing is when you switch batches or genetics. So typically a batch is always the same genetic, but anytime you switch to a new batch or a new genetic, which often they're the same, you want to weigh out. This will allow you to, for your distribution side, this will allow you to kind of get a real-time count of where you're at before you switch on to a new genetic, and it just keeps things more organized. The third area you want to weigh out is when you're taking a break. So when your staff, obviously you want to give them 15, 20-minute, hour-long breaks, depending on how long they work. So in between those break times, definitely weigh out, and obviously at the end of the day end, it allows you to kind of see where they started and where they ended, and really understand the efficiency and progress to that day. So those are the 4 times that you want to weigh out. Just to check in, I just want to take a quick second to see if there is any questions out there. There's a Q&A. I'll just take a quick second. Don't be shy. Cool. We'll also have some time at the end, and feel free to plug in a question if it comes to you. I understand everybody's kind of at different phases. To some people, this may not be new information, or you might just learn a few things, or it might be all new. So we respect where everybody is and hope everybody can get value. So the next thing is actually getting the data into the system. So remember we talked about having a digital way to get this in the system. Many people may use something like this in a Google Sheet or an Excel, which is a digital format. This is actually the GroLens UI for entering trim data line by line. The good news is in a kind of holistic system, by entering it in here, that inventory will already be ready to be invoiced out and create a sales order. You could kind of connect all the dots. However, something like Excel would allow you to put in data, but you would eventually have to put it somewhere else to make sense of it, or kind of share that knowledge. So ultimately what you have here is just what you would see in a batch. So ultimately you have the first column of these are the entry points for each time you weigh in or weigh out. So who actually trimmed that inventory, the time that data was entered, which is really important when it comes to tracking timestamp and efficiency. The first total is rough inventory, and then you have a breakdown of the buds, small buds, trim, and waste. Just to take a step back, all of these categories are based on how granular you like to be in your operation. Some operations only track their A grade buds and trim, while others want to do buds, smalls, and kind of track down the line, whether that mass be used for pre-rolls or whatever. But you have the option and flexibility to kind of do that based on the needs of your facility. The second thing is analyzing the data. And I'll get in a little more into the analytics side and kind of give you, a demo of how that analytics looks. Get this plugged in here. But just a couple high level analytics points. After you trim a batch, you're looking at it, if you want to look at it by individual, when you're looking at, um, the productivity of your specific trimmer, you can look at it by batch, which really comes in handy when it pertains to paying out your trimmers. I know many trimmers are compensated based on how much weight they do. So when you're weighing by batch and you worked on a batch at a time, you can see how much did Kevin trim on this particular batch. So it basically allows you to do that. The next thing is you can analyze it by strain. That comes in handy because it allows you to recognize patterns between strains. You might find that one strain will have more shape than another. You might find that one strain produces more A grade, bigger bud. So those are kind of things when you're doing that analysis by strain you can see. All time, you can also analyze how much a trimmer and individual has trimmed for the lifetime of working with you in one spot. And the last thing that comes in handy is just loss percentages. Typically, everybody does have loss percentages within their grow, whether that be it gets on the ground or it's just kind of a part of the process. But understanding what that percentage is and working to minimize it can work really well. So that's kind of high level. So far. So I just wanted to hop into a brief demo of the platform. So as I click into a grow operation, all the phases pop up. I'm going to go to the batches that are in my drying phase. And I'm going to click trim because that's where you start the trimming process. The ones that are green already have trim data entered, but it looks like this yellow one is in progress. So I'm going to click that one and see what we have here. So it looks like only a small batch of 3 plants. I'm going to put those plants in one place. And then I'm just going to enter some data. So I'm going to say, hey, it looks like Richard did this. it automatically defaults the time to today, and then you can put in that rough weight. And keep in mind, this is just our web interface. You can also see this all via mobile, which I'll touch on as well. So say you gave them roughly 4,500 rough weight, and they gave you back 3,200 of small buds, 1,250 of small buds, and 450. Cool. So that's where you will ultimately record that information, and then you close it out. That will field will mark as green, and I just move it over to the finish column, and then I'm able to analyze and look at that trim data from that particular batch. I'm just going to take a quick pause and see if there's one question. What trim companies would you recommend that are in compliance with GroLens? We would have to check specific trim companies that outsource it. Most of our customers do it in-house, but we could surely get back to you on that. Any other questions out there? Cool. So I'm going to go over to the dashboard side of the platform and kind of go over some of the analytics as it pertains to trimming. So the way this dashboard is set up is it's grow, harvest, and sale. So ultimately, trimming has to do with the harvesting side, so I'm going to go to harvest. Here you have a breakdown of all the trimmers data by strain, by batch, and all time. Just to kind of give you an idea of some of that data, it just basically populates here in a printable, downloadable report where you can see those loss percentages, notice trims there. You can see all-time, weights trimmed by an individual, and you can use this data kind of, if you look at it by batch, to see how much they trim on a given run, and use that to help with the payment side. You also have the ability to kind of just at a higher level, as you're trimming, you can look at your yields categorically, how much trim you're producing, how much buds you're producing in pounds. You also can look at that data specifically associated with the date, but we can also add filters in here that allow you to see that by batch as well, just to kind of give a better idea of where you stand from a harvest and yield perspective.